Tidying up. I've always been a bit of a slob. You know the type, dressing myself exclusively from the top layers of the haphazard, mostly clean laundry pile, takeaway containers sitting on the kitchen counter until bin day, washing up left to soak. A few months ago though, I found myself with a lot of free time, and very little to do, and I decided to finally do something about it. Obviously, I won't bore you with the details of my epic adventures in tidying up, enough to say that I got there in the end. All my odds and ends in their proper cupboards and drawers and carefully labeled plastic tubs. I even bought this lovely wooden coat rack to put next to the front door so that my always buried chair could take its place back at the kitchen table. The coat rack turned out to be the biggest issue. Oh, I behaved myself for a good 2 weeks, carefully maintaining my new organization system, cycling items off the rack into the laundry or closets as needed. But then things started to creep. A hat here, a scarf. There, a second jacket because I wear both of them all the time, and how silly to keep needing to get them out of the closet each time. It didn't take long before pretty much every single piece of last-minute clothing that I owned was piled on the thing. This lumpy, useless mess that I still managed to justify because hey, clothes belong on a coat rack. It stayed like that for a few more weeks, happily accruing more and more bulk. I'm also guilty of just buying a new scarf if I can't find my old one in the pile, until things came to a tipping point one night. I'd woken up parched enough that I dragged myself out of bed to fetch a drink of water. I have to pass the front hallway to reach the kitchen, and a car drove past the house just as I did, headlights passing through the glass panes of the door to cast a long shadow off the rack. It looked so much worse at night. In the daytime at least it was a bright jumble of colors and patterns and textures, almost like a decor piece, if you were lazy and willing to squint. At night though, it was nothing more than a mess, filling the room with shameful shadows. I resolved right there to fix it up the next day, and actually followed through. I felt good that day. I'd spotted a problem, fixed it right up. It felt like I was finally turning my life around, with that one small act. I made a point of looking over to it that night when I got up for another drink, keen to see the difference. As I peered through the darkness, though, there really wasn't any difference. The meager illumination from the street lights seemed to cast just as depressingly large a shadow as before. I aimed the flashlight on my phone over there. Yes, still clean. It felt beyond frustrating that after all my work earlier I still had that oppressive shadow to deal with at night. I moved on towards the kitchen, resolving to move the rack to try to reduce how much of the light it was blocking. When I switched the flashlight off though, only the stick-thin shadow of an empty coat rack remained. I wasn't sure at the time why I felt so unsettled. A leaden lump filled my stomach as I took a half step back into my original position to survey the hallway. There, just as I'd expected to see the first time, was the clear silhouette of my lovely clean coat rack against the front door. Nothing out of place, but the unexpected shift had me on edge. The coat rack was slim and stable, but the other shadows in the room seemed swollen to compensate, longer than usual, and with a sort of flicker that didn't seem to be coming from the street lights. I huffed my breath out forcefully, giving a lock of hair a self-admonishing yank. God, Lisa, get it together. It helped. A minor embarrassment chased most of the fright away as I carried on towards the kitchen for my drink. I still couldn't bring myself to look down the hallway on my way back though, letting a faint disinterest carry me through until I could pull the door to my bedroom closed behind me. I slept uneasily that night, snapping back to wakefulness with every creak and groan in the house. I did finally manage to drift off though, and slept through until about 4:30, when my bedroom door clicked closed. I didn't move an inch, or open my eyes. Nothing seemed to be happening, and I was loath to provide any catalyst to action. I even managed to keep my breathing steady, slow and even against the hitch that tried to fight its way out with each inhalation. The room seemed unnaturally warm, and between the paralyzing terror and my steadfast refusal to shade my protective barrier, I was soon drenched in sweat. A very long 20 minutes later, I'd started to convince myself that I was hearing things, or that I'd left the door open a touch and the wind had caught it. The embarrassment began creeping up again, and I was considering just getting up early when the pounding of my heart eased enough that I could hear it. A second something breathing in the room. It was indistinct, mingling with my own breathing, only really audible in the slight pauses that I allowed myself between breaths. From what I could tell, it seemed to be coming from the foot of the bed. Every muscle in my body was tensed for the telltale pressure on my mattress that would mean it was climbing up. We stayed locked like that for maybe another 5 minutes, long enough, I'm sure, for it to be convinced that I'd become aware of its presence, before I heard a gentle shuffling as it moved. It didn't bother to close the door on its way out. I stayed exactly how I was until the sun was fully in the sky, and even then it took me quite a lot of internal dialogue before I'd opened my eyes. I didn't hang around for breakfast, only taking a hysterical shower, facing the bathroom door the entire time, and quickly dragging my uniform in before rushing out to work, shoving the coat rack into the hallway closet, with my eyes tightly shut, on the way out the door. I went straight to the bar after work, uniform and all. It was a welcome distraction, honestly. A few drinks in the noisy atmosphere full of life did wonders to chase away the gloom that had followed me around all day. I still made sure that I didn't go home alone though. He started divesting himself of clothing the instant he got inside the house, jacket and shoes carelessly strewn about the floor before we'd even cleared the, thankfully empty, hallway. He slept nude afterwards, and I really hoped that wouldn't turn out to be an issue in the night. Nothing happened though. The both of us slept through the night, and as far as I could tell from when I was awake, the door remained closed, and the only extra sounds came from the correct side of the bed. His jacket was gone when we approached the door after breakfast and a shower, and my heart was in my throat as he opened the closet door before I could even start to figure out how to warn him. Again though, nothing. He came back out with arm and jacket intact, despite my internal horror, and didn't even bother to say goodbye as he ambled down the street as I locked the door behind us. The non-eventful night had given me confidence, however, and I returned that evening after work alone. I slept with the lights on, and with my side table shoved against the door, yes, but I did it. And again, nothing happened. Until the morning when I emerged and found the coat rack sitting in its usual place in the hallway, completely covered in clothes. I ignored it for a full week, lived my life as normal, except that I firmly pretended that the coat rack, and by unfortunate extension, a lot of my clothing, didn't exist. And nothing happened. No noises in the night, no mysterious movement of furniture, no unusual activity of any kind. Until the next weekend, when the calm emboldened me and I decided to clear off the coat rack and dispose of it fully. I'd gotten about 2 layers deep, carefully peeling garments off and setting them aside, when disaster struck. I reached out for a bright yellow headscarf, one of my favorites, and before I could process what had happened, my hand was caught tight, pulled deep within the remaining layers. The temperature skyrocketing once again. Ever so slowly, a gap between items started to form, clothing folding and shifting to form a shadow tunnel to the heart of the pile, revealing the barest impression of a face, defined predominantly by 3 faintly gleaming eyes, and a mouthful of sharp teeth. It looked me in the eye as some unseen force dragged my hand up towards that mouth, pressing the back of my hand against those teeth in a terrifying mockery of a gentleman's kiss. Slowly, almost lovingly, it pierced my flesh with the 2 longest of its teeth, sliding them in scant millimeters before it stopped. It held me there for a moment, 2 of its eyes remaining fixed on mine as the third slid slowly to the pile of clothing that I'd removed, and then back to me. "Okay," I sobbed, nodding frantically as the tears finally started crawling down my cheeks. "I'll get the coats back for you. Please." I'd up for the pile the second my hand was released, tossing them haphazardly back onto the rack, where they rustled back into their original positions. The heat seemed to drop with every item returned, until finally the last piece dropped into place, and everything was still. I mostly decided at that point that I'd just try to ignore the coat rack and occupant. If sacrificing the clothes that it had is what keeps the peace, then fine. But after about a week of ignoring it, I was heading to the door when I spotted my previously buried yellow headscarf draped tantalizingly on the outer layer of the rack. All I could do was stare. It was obviously a trap, right? I must have been frozen for too long though, because it flapped it impatiently at me. Eventually I decided that it was probably less dangerous to do what it wanted. I knew, after all, that it was perfectly capable of moving on its own, so I reached out a tentative hand and murmured a word of thanks as I pulled it free and tied it into place around my hair. Things actually went mostly back to normal after that. It lets me know that it's still there. The air is noticeably warmer around the rack, which actually dries damp clothes out rather well, and I try to say hello when I pass it. I'm allowed to take clothes for the day off the coat rack, as long as I put them back when I'm done. I've even started buying it the occasional present, the odd scarf, an appallingly unattractive pair of purple pants that I thought set off its color balance nicely, a novelty hat for on top, apparently well received. It's definitely been an adjustment. I can't have people over, obviously, and sometimes it would be nice to be able to pick my own jacket. But overall, things could be worse. I don't think that it's the only one anymore though. My yarn box is weirdly cold, and I'm pretty sure that the garbage hissed at me yesterday when I tried to take it outside. Whenever I worry about that though, I look at the 2 round dots on my hand. They still haven't healed, and I don't think that they ever will, and I know that it could be worse. I'll always be a bit of a slob. Laundry piling up until there's nothing to wear, stacks of pizza boxes in the corner in the kitchen, piles of things that are being used. You know the type.